Hello and welcome to the Virtual Frontier, the podcast about virtual teams created by Virtual Team. Disclaimer, all of our interviews are conducted virtually. I'm Daniel, your host, and I'm part of the team here at the Virtual Frontier. In this episode, we welcome Joern Menninger, aka Startup Joe, as our guest. Joe is a true storyteller. Storytelling is a means for sharing and interpreting experiences. Human life is narratively rooted, and as humans we construct our lives and shape our world into homes in terms of these groundings and memories. Stories are something universal and can bridge cultural, linguistic and age-related divides. Joe has found his passion in providing us with stories and news from the startup world. With his weekly shows and updates, he has become an important source for startups and investors all around the globe. Today, I talk with Joe about his own story during 2020, what he values most when scouting for new startups, and what most entrepreneurs get wrong while they grow their business, and why it is so important to have the right attitude when it comes to failure. A quick mention of our sponsor. FlashUp. Build your virtual team systematically and methodically. Scale with your business at any time and make work better. You want to expand your knowledge of how virtual teams work and learn how to build your own team? Join the next Virtual Team Challenge and get all the tools and frameworks for it. If you want to learn more about the next challenge, visit flashup.io. If you like this show, subscribe on YouTube, review it on Apple Podcast, follow us on Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon Music, or any other platform you like to podcast. You can also take the next step and get involved in our growing community activities. To do so, you can support the creators' work on Patreon, get to hear episodes in advance, join exclusive live sessions, and help us select guests and topics. You can also engage with our community on Discord. All the links you can find below in the description. So, without further ado, let's dive into episode 34 of the Virtual Frontier. Enjoy the conversation. Hey Joe, welcome to the Virtual Frontier. I'm really happy to have you today on our show. Was quite exciting for me because it's a big podcast in the world with in the top 150 tech branch. You're quite big for me, so way over my head. But I hope I don't fuck it up today with you. And just let's dive in. Joe, if you would like to share a little bit of background info from where you're coming, I'm really interested also to hear your story about how you ended up in the whole startup environment and how did it go for you. And just take it ahead.
First, thank you very much for having me. Thank you for the invitation. Looking forward to this interview. It's usually I do with my co-host Transatlantic News, New York, Frankfurt recording. Let's see how Mexico works here. That's it. My name's originally Joern Menninger, but everybody knows me as Joe. I am hosting since 2015 the startup podcast StartupRate.io, so startup radio with a period in the name. Since January 1st, 2021, I'm running this full time. And before that, it evolved from being a hobby to being a side business to being a hopefully viable full-time business. I started out, as so many people do, with a vocational training in Germany after graduating from high school. Then I went in a bank. Then I went on to study. My studies took me to China for half a year. I was also doing some language school in Madrid. I was there when the attacks of Atocha took place. And I then went on to my internship in China. And basically, after being 2 weeks in Germany, I went from here to my senior year in Texas at Midwestern State University. Go Mustangs! And graduated from there, came back, did an internship, wrote my final thesis, and then I started out consulting. I've always been dabbling a little bit in startup entrepreneurship. When I was in university here in Germany, I started what they call a junior enterprise. So basically students get together for projects and help very small or small or medium businesses to do something. For example, we helped a plumbing company to get the finances straightened out and stuff like that. So I always had like a side business, and at one point in time, a friend approached me who knew someone who wanted to start a startup podcast. That was basically, I do believe, sometime in summer 2012. And I was being the co-host for quite some time. This project was shut down back in 2017. And at one point in time, I did have the first interview guest in Berlin who wasn't a German native speaker. And he said, okay, I'm kind of okay with German, but I would rather do an interview in English. I said, okay, let's go ahead. And that was the point when I started with English podcasting. Then my former co-host and I talked on the German startup podcast about it. And then basically we split everything in English, went to startuprate.io, my own project, and everything I did in German stayed with a German speaking podcast. So if you really go back in time, you should be able to find even content from 2019. If you're doing this on a podcasting app, you'll only see 2014. And in the podcasting app, you'll only see 2019 for the very simple reason that I started with an external hosting service back in 2019. I had to upload all my content at this point in time. And no, I could not produce more than 150 podcasts in just one day. That was just the upload date.
Right.
And ever since it kind of spiraled out from there. So in 2017, when I was still hosting all the files on my own website around Christmas, the website went down, too much traffic, which was of course a good sign. Then I had the same issue in 2018 around Christmas. In 2017, I made the first appearances in international podcast charts. 2018 again. At one point, of course, I was spending a lot on marketing, and at one point, I was even in the top 10 back in 2018 in the overall podcast charts in the US. But don't overstate that, because podcast charts are like a composite of downloads and new subscribers. So there was just a lot of new subscribers coming on there. I haven't gotten why they do it for some time, but then I was reading a blog post, because there are like a dozen, maybe 3 dozen really, really big podcasts. They are like small companies, and they would have been always in the top, and nobody could make it in there if they just go for downloads. That's why it's a composite, and that's why we frequently appear on many, many different podcast charts, because we do get new subscribers there, but also frequently a lot of downloads, which I like. So starting 2018, we've been in podcast charts. 2019, this kind of evolved. In 2018, I was already nominated for the Benzinger Global FinTech Awards. I went to New York. I went to London for the Landed, and so on. And so ever since, I've been doing more and more content. And right now, since I'm doing it full time, I'm actually running twice a week a podcast show. I'll do some blogging for the very simple reason that I'm addressing a B2B audience, and some of the content is really hard to transport just on audio and or video. That's why I'm writing it. For example, when I talk about investing, the investment framework, investment numbers, and so on and so forth, if you're just listening to numbers, it gets a little bit strange. Back in 2018, I was also asked then by my former boss to be a startup scout. And so I started working as a startup scout, and it only made me startup scout because I already had like a big network of startup contacts. And ever since, I could like combine those two a little bit, podcasting and scouting startups. Eventually it didn't work out. Corona struck, and that's why I'm now out here by myself. 2021. Hopefully the year's getting better than 2020.
I hope so.
There was a lot of talking. Sorry. Give me some more specific questions. I don't want to talk all the time.
I will. I know because you're already the pro, and but I let me ask you something. What got you really the interesting or the interest in startups and not whatever cars or airplanes? Making a podcast about that. Why startups?
Admittedly, I'm not a big car fan. So as of today, January 2021, I don't even own a car. So, and before that, I was driving for 22 years, the same old very first car. And at one point in time, it was just too old. It could not get through the review process. So in all the Germans would know TÜV. Not many other countries know that. So every 2 years, you just have to show your car and show it's traffic worthy. Mine, after being like almost 25 years old, it couldn't do that anymore. So I gave it up, and ever since I was not driving a car. Talking about entrepreneurship, I would say I always had a tendency to entrepreneurship. My mom loves to tell the story when I was 4 years old and I was out on the street selling strawberries from our own garden. Admittedly, it's a very small town, so the only potential clients were neighbors, and they were always smiling and buying for a few Pfennig German cents. A little bit of my strawberry. So I always had a tendency to do that. And actually, the more I learned about technology and what you can do with it, like talking AI, deep tech, the internet, 5G, and whatever is out there and coming in the future, you always see opportunities to do something with that. And I figured out I love to talk, as your audience can already tell. So basically that was a good place for me to start with my podcast. Before that, I was dabbling in some businesses, like very tiny businesses. You cannot really call them startups. I was helping, when I was living in China, a friend starting a language school, which was a chain at top five different language schools within a district of Beijing. I was helping, I was together with a friend starting an online antiquarian bookshop, meaning for used books, for old books. And we had like church books from the 1880s and stuff like this. It was actually at the time when Momox and Rebuy here in Germany became big. But my partner at this point decided he would rather go for his PhD than to do a startup. So we had to shut this down. And that's why I've been basically sticking with podcasting, because I like it. And usually in podcasting, I'm not talking that much on my personal podcast. I always say it's a good relationship if I talk like 20% of the time and the guest talks about 80% of the time. I'm afraid in this interview it will be I'm talking 90% and you'll be talking 10%.
I did make my note 2080 noted.
The Pareto principle.
Yes. Joe, as I already heard from you, like the last year with COVID also did impact your business with Delloite when you were there as a startup scout. In general overview, what big changes you notice in the startup sphere over the last months? What changes came up? How did startups evolve or decrease? How they cope with the situation, as they are all like young entrepreneurs and they're still in the finding, and is there a big O-tone that can be told, or a big story about that?
Well, I would say, like, for startups, the big changes will be on the horizon. Like digital only business models will become even more popular than they are today. The big quarterly results of Amazon, of Netflix, and so on. They're just the tip of the iceberg. There'll be much more coming, even for startups here in Germany. The digital-only business model will become more popular. Right now, many startups are in the survival mode. It wasn't particularly new for startups to work like in remote, in digital teams. I think that was more a change for the more established German corporates. I think that didn't change a lot here. But as I talk to many entrepreneurs, like frequently I have like, let's say, a dozen phone conversations a week with different startups, entrepreneurs, investors, and people like you who reach out on LinkedIn to me. So right now I see a lot of ideas in preparation, but I do see the main changes are coming over time. Like there's no big bam, now here's the complete change for the future. Just some startups really, some companies really been doing great here. Just think about Peloton, the remote workout company that offers you this bicycle and basically a remote gym. Netflix, as I talked about already, that are the ones that are prospering now. But I do believe more digital businesses, more digital business ideas will be there, up and coming. And right now, there's some activity actually here in Germany. I do get regular emails, and today they said, one newsletter said a new record, 123 startups founded like last week in Germany that they could track. So there's entrepreneurial activity already starting. The startups are preparing ideas, but I don't think we'll see a lot until, let's say, at least fall 2021, maybe even spring 2022 is when really the changes will hit.
But this is like more on the opportunity side. I see the development by like 123 startups in 1 week. So there's a lot of movement and ideas that are coming up, and startups and entrepreneurs are trying to cope with the situation and make the best out of it, right?
Yeah, the Chinese are always very philosophic, and a crisis is for them like a two-character word, and one character is problem and one character is opportunity.
Yep,
It's true, and I also saw this opportunity. Basically, you may know the trouble, but most of your audience won't know that it's really always very hard to say how many subscribers, how many downloads you have, because podcasting is extremely decentralized. And but what you can say is basically a download request. So there's either a bot, say from Amazon Music, from Spotify, from Feo, or something that looks, oh, is there new content? Is there something new? Can I download something? Or there's an app, there's a desktop computer or something else requesting there, and you can actually track those requests pretty easily. And I can see those requests been growing like almost 1,600% annually for my podcast since end of 2018, beginning of 2019. But there was like a really, really big growth in the last quarter of 2020, and hopefully that'll continue.
So I guess people have also more time right now, and or are more interested in seeing what's coming up.
I would say it's part of many things. We get more press coverage. For example, Tech EU and Crunchbase recommended us as the only startup podcast from Germany on their list, English-speaking startup podcasts. We also do get a lot of coverage in like other blogs and stuff like that. Plus, people have more time at hand, and podcasting. When I started out, many people asked, what is a podcast? Now people say, oh yeah, I have a few podcasts that I subscribe to, and people start just using it more, utilizing their reach out to the world in terms of podcasting more, because there's a lot of good and interesting podcasts out there. And since I'm working full time here, as I told you, I work at least once a week until midnight. But I do take a longer lunch break. So I have lunch with my family and then I take a walk. And during this walk, every day I'll listen to podcasts. There are a lot of very, very good podcasts out there. But admittedly, I'm not necessarily listening to a lot of startup podcasts like by startup companies or covering startup companies. I'm rather listening to other stuff because I'm basically focused on startups and tech like 90% of my work life.
Sure. The rest has to be something else, like having a good time while listening to interesting people around the globe,
Yeah,
philosophy or whatever, right?
something like this. But admittedly, I also listen sometimes to the Wall Street Journal, to the
Sure.
Economist, and like the big guys, because in a podcast you can, because if you talk to a person, if you have an interview like an podcast interview with some people, you can get really more information out of this interview than like a written statement. Plus, it's almost the only way you can really get to know a little bit, a tiny bit, the personality of your interview partner. Otherwise, it's very hard to see that from something else. When you see an interview on TV, it's cut down to like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, sometimes even half a minute, just a little statement or something like that. And there is something I don't like too much. That's why my interviews are going on for quite some time, usually between 25 and 45 minutes, where admittedly my audience has a tendency to prefer more something like 30, 35 minutes.
Okay. When we talk about startups in general, and you're like an expert in this field, as you have worked in this particular field for many years now. When you get to know a new startup or a new company, what is the first thing you're really looking for to decide this is something interesting, or this could be something interesting, or something that is of value or opportunity? What are the things that as a scout you're watching first, or what are you looking at?
Um, I'm afraid I lost a little bit you. First thing as a scout, I'm looking for, right?
Yeah, the question is what you're looking for as a scout, and when you reach out to new companies, or when you're looking for new companies, what is your main interest, or what is it when you decide, okay, this is something I should look further into. This could be an opportunity in the future, or I want to have them maybe on a podcast, or how you decide how you go for them. What are you looking for?
Usually nothing substitutes talking to the entrepreneur, C-level executive there. What I usually do is like shaking my head, because a lot of startups out there, they do very interesting stuff, but they're not good in communicating it. So when you go on a company's website, they do whatever, and they call it, and they say, we call it da 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 da, and that's basically a term they see as a USP. We're the only one doing this and that. But for a person not involved in such a company, it's very hard to understand what they actually do. I would say at least 50% of these startup company websites fail to communicate what those guys are actually doing. Some of them are very good in highlighting the benefit for potential user. But me, in my former position as a startup scout, I was more going for how those guys are doing it, because the idea was to bring them together with the clients of my former employer and make something awesome, new, innovative out of that. And there was something I usually could not find on a company website. What I'm personally looking for is something unique. If you're now a meal kit company, chances are very slim that I'll take you in the interview. I'm personally also looking for B2B content because there is always kind of a divide, because B2C companies, they have to be good in marketing or they die. B2B companies, they don't have necessarily to be very good in marketing. The problem is that kind of goes on through their lifetime, because if you look into like English speaking press, blogs, press coverage, it's usually the B2C companies they highlight. For one reason, it's more interesting to the audience. And for the second reason, the B2C companies are just better in doing marketing. So I'm personally looking more for the B2B companies that are not that popular. So basically, in the last few years, I frequently got the message, oh, we've been on this podcast and this podcast and this podcast. Don't you want to do an interview with us as well? And usually my answer is just no. I'm looking for original content. I'm looking for content nobody else has. Like 80% of the startups that I'm talking to you don't have anything in English. That's what I'm looking for as a podcaster. As a startup scout, I was always looking at the technology. Is it stable? Can it potentially scale like on a global level? How would it fit within a client? How are the prospects for the company, for example? Is it interesting for an investor? And that would be the stuff I'm looking for: scalability and stability of the technological solution. And as well as the ability to kind of connect it, like talking APIs or stuff like this, to other software, other tools.
As I watched some of the episodes from your recent past, I got also the feeling that a lot of those entrepreneurs, they're not really used to talk maybe to press or telling really their story. You have like really to nudge them and get the story out, right? What they're really doing and find their story inside their company. That's the feeling I got sometimes, not always, but it seems like a lot of those tech startups, it seems they're like more introverted and they're really good and really experts in what they're doing, but they lack to communicate the story around their business, as you already mentioned, right?
Yes, that is actually one of the points I'm trying to make. I try to give my airtime, my coverage to startups who don't already have like 100 zillion articles, blogs, podcasts, press coverage, press articles out there about them. That's what I'm looking for. That's kind of my USP. And yes, usually I talk to early or pretty early stage startups, which also means that I do have not PR trained interview partners there, which is awesome. But I already had it like one or two times in very, very early interviews. They then got a PR coach. The PR coach first looked on the internet on all the interviews. What did the entrepreneur do? What did he say? And I've already received two requests to take interviews offline because they were a little bit too open, too opinionated, expressed a little bit too much of what they were thinking for their new PR stuff. And of course, I complied with those requests. But it's actually something I like, because it also tells you a lot about the personality, about the person. When the people are coached by PR stuff, when they do a lot of interviews, you can usually tell it tends to be a little bit more boring, a little bit more straightforward, because those entrepreneurs usually give frequent interviews and it usually goes along the same lines, which is, of course, also interesting for me because it's a challenge to really get something new, something unique out of them.
When we talked about the startups and like when things are not really settled in the first phase of scaling up. I found it crucial, like really getting a great team set up. But I also see that startups like fail often in this phase. Um, where do you see the biggest potential there? When or where can startups and founders and entrepreneurs like really get into when they grow as a startup, maybe from 2-3 people, and then they might bump up with their stuff, and one day and they have like 20 or 25 or 50 people, and they're like starting to struggle with this whole environment. What would you say is important in this phase of a startup?
You can always scale technology solutions, but you cannot scale people. So people are your limiting factor and are the most crucial asset of any company out there. Personally, I found the, let's say, first dozen hires of people you don't know really crucial for the success of a startup. And it's also where the entrepreneur can do a lot of stuff right or could do a lot of stuff wrong, because down the road in like 10-15 years, maybe he wants to retire, he wants to spend his money and looks for a replacement, and maybe there's somebody who he had hired in the beginning who could replace him. That would be like the ideal long-term solution. um, Frequently I do see that people treat hiring more like project work. So basically they're looking for, that's the current job, check, 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 everything's fine, yeah, hire this person. They don't really see that the environment is very dynamic and then it may need to take on other roles over time, that the company may grow too big to be a suitable employer for the skills of this person or something like this. So bottom line, you can do a lot of stuff right with the first handful of hires, but it's a make or break moment for almost every startup out there, especially if you hire like tech talent, if you hire like the first sales or marketing people that would leave an impression of your company out there. That is the very crucial moment. And I would strongly, strongly recommend for everybody to really think about what they actually look for, to think about how they can establish company culture. Because if you just hire people and give them a desk and say, okay, let's work, that is not the setup where you really establish company culture. The very first few hires are extremely crucial for the medium to long-term success of your company, and maybe they even decide if there's a medium success for your company at all. That is one of the points I really see frequently, that they either solved greatly or badly. And for the badly solved recruiting problems, that's usually a company that'll be shut down soon.
I'm also seeing like this huge shift since with the whole Corona situation during the last years. Then everyone was pushed in remote work uh, situations. That companies, especially startups, right now are also hiring people more globally, right? Or remote in the first place, which is I guess a good thing, because you can attract a lot more talent that fits to you or to your company, and you're not really restrained to getting them um, in San Francisco or in Berlin, which are already like cities or locations that are so expensive that almost nobody can move there, or you have to pay so high salaries that for a startup that is might not possible. And I see that with Flash Up, the company that we're working with, that there's a huge chance, especially for startups, to scale quickly with a global workforce, with freelancers around the globe. And then you don't have to worry like months and months to get the right people at your place. No, you have to maybe work on and focus on getting the culture right, as you said before, and getting right really the people onboarded and having the right base for them. But I wonder what you think about that change over the last months.
I think that's also something that will leave tracks in the future. Um, I see more and more startups. Before, they've been pretty open to do like remote work with like a handful of people. Right now, I'm seeing more and more startups initially set up to be completely remote or as remote as possible.
Mm.
Uh, I do think that's one of the consequences of the corona pandemic. I do believe it is not yet well enough understood how you can really establish company culture, a good work environment with like an almost completely remote company. I do believe there's a lot of work to be done, and the people now at the cutting edge of this, they just have to do the work. Uh,
Mm.
I could not point to like any research, any publication, anything I've seen so far. They are like a lot of good pieces to the puzzle, but there's no complete overall picture how you could really do that. And of course, that is and will be a challenge for the foreseeable future, especially if you have people like from very diverse cultural backgrounds, let's say in different time zones, with more or less stable internet connection. So that'll be a problem for even the coming years.
Yeah, yeah. And you don't have to go so far for getting like bad internet connections. You can just stay in Germany, right? Problems can arise there very quickly. Um, I would like to dive a little bit more with you in the mentality of creating startups. As we talked before, uh, I see a lot of times this mentality in Germany or in Europe, maybe speaking a little bit more general about this mentality when you go and say, okay, we have a great idea for a startup and we are going for it, and then they start up with their activities. And most of the times they have in mind, okay, this is our one shot and we have to get it right and best of get rich or sell the company later on for the highest bidder. And um, it doesn't really work out all the time. There's a lot of failure, and I put it here in my notes. Like startup to fail is maybe a good keyword for that. But in Europe, we have like this mentality that has to work out the first time I try. If it's not working right now, it will never work. And when you go in other countries, in the US or in Americas and in general, there's more like this attitude. Okay, we're gonna try it today. If it's not working today, I start a new thing tomorrow. So this is more like a learning process. How could like startups in Germany or in Europe getting more into this mentality, or what is might missing?
That's a good question. I do believe the mentality here on the side of the entrepreneurs as well as on the side of the investors are changing for the better. Um, I do believe public perception of like a failed startup entrepreneur needs to change, but that's nothing that'll happen in like the next 5 years. Um, I really do believe that a lot of entrepreneurs are already here to really try this out. And I just talked to a startup who raised hundreds of millions, and they said, "Oh, we're not out there yet, but we, if when we start, you'll notice it, you'll see it, and we'll either fail fast and spectacularly, or we'll succeed spectacularly. So even this approach has already arrived here in Germany.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I guess it's also important from like as well from the founder side, um, but also from the investor side, right? To have this mentality that the things doesn't have to work out in the first run. When I was doing a little bit research on the podcast for today, there it's I guess it's more like in the United States where you have like this different rounds of founding, right? And with the increased series of foundings, like the things are getting more serious. But fairly in the pre-seed and the seeding stage and the age rounds, there's like more this acceptance of failure, right? And even if you go and look in the later stages, there are also like fallbacks where you could say, okay, this is still a phase where we can ask for more money because things are still not working out as we expected. And yeah, I would see that also, or I would like to see it also more in Germany or in the German speaking market, where things are still like you have to get all things first in order before receiving money or getting funds for your startup.
Mm-hmm. I do believe funding is still an issue here in Germany, but I continually see it's getting better. It was close to impossible in 2013 to get startup funding here in Frankfurt. Right now, I would say it's not easy money. You don't go to two people and you end up with 100,000 euros, but it's better. I talked to a lot of investors here in and around Frankfurt. They do have the biggest business angel association in Germany, but they are not investing big numbers. What has been missing as a crucial step, what's already out there, for example, in Silicon Valley, is entrepreneurs who have been very successful, maybe made an exit, listed their company, and do have now a lot of cash on their hands to invest with an entrepreneurial mentality that is coming, but it's coming slowly. You can see it, for example, already in Berlin with a handful of VC funds set up by successful entrepreneurs. And I do see it more and more coming all across Germany. That is also like the investors, the entrepreneurial investors, let's call them that way, that are a little bit more needed and that I do see more, even though not in sufficient numbers yet.
Mhm. When we talk about crucial and also then to wrap up the things, um, you as an expert, when you see startups in general, what are maybe the one or two topics where startups always fail or most often fail, and if you could give out a tip or a recommendation how to avoid that, that would be really interesting for us.
Uh, Not really sure if I'm a startup expert, but I do see two tendencies,
Mm.
either too small or too big. Like they're thinking, yeah, oh, well, let's do first the market around here at Frankfurt and maybe we expand to Germany. That's the one side of the coin. And the other side of the coin is like, yeah, in 4 weeks, we're going to open something in Singapore and New York, like on an extreme scale. I would say startups in general in Germany don't think enough about internationalization, global scaling. Um, and the way too ambitious plans are also still around. I talked to a lot of those extremely ambitious startups, but it looks to me, at least right now, that they have not necessarily succeeded with those ambitious plans. So I do believe making reasonable plans is a good thing. Like you said, pre-seed, seed, Series A funding, and then you can go into like global scaling. And that may take, depending on your startup, 3 to even 6 years before you get there, before there's really, up to 6 years before there's really a reward for being an entrepreneur, for really scaling, for really selling your equity to potential investors. It's not that fast here in Germany. I see some cases in the US where it happens quite fast, but also in the US, there are successful companies which have been around for quite some time and did not just press a button and skate globally, but rather they build up continually. And I think do reasonable planning, look for your first hires, and always make sure you have if you take external investors, the due diligence, and make sure you do have an alignment of interest there. If you don't have it, your startup may fail as certain as when you hire bad people, as when you never get your tech straight. That are the crucial components, like your product, speaking about tech, your employees, and your investors. There was, for example, once an article in TechCrunch that more startups failed due to their investors than due to the market.
This is really interesting. Yeah. So the setup and also the investor sides and getting the alignments right is really crucial in the first place.
It's never worth taking money from somebody you don't want to have a beer with. It's never worth to have investors speaking like 5,000 euros, 10,000 euros, up to 100,000 euros that don't bring any added value to the table. I do have 2 very awesome investors in my company, but they are not, their financial contribution is small, but it's by far the smallest part, the lowest number of reasons for what I have them in my company, because they bring additional skills, they bring additional network, they bring additional capabilities that I don't have. That is something you would need to look for in an investor. Not only money. Money you can get pretty quickly everywhere, but keep in mind, investors can also kill your company pretty fast.
Mm-hmm. So that keep in mind. Dear Joe, thank you so much for taking the time today. I was really happy to get all the insights out of you and sharing this time. If people and startups or entrepreneurs want to reach out or get connected with you, or where should they go, and how they could probably connect with you?
Basically, they can go to LinkedIn, search for Joern Menninger. They could also write me an email, joe@startuprate.io. They can go to www.startuprate.io or just punch in startup.radio and they'll end up on my website. And if they just punch something into the contact sheet, they'll get straight to me, or they can even find me on all podcasting apps. And there's always a feedback form that they can reach me, as well as my Twitter, LinkedIn account, linked in the show notes. Depending on your device, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
And we're gonna link all this, of course, in our show
notes. Down here.
Down there, here. Great. Thanks again, Joe, for taking the time today. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
I want to thank our guest Joern for joining us today. To find out more about the work of Joern, you should visit his site startuprate.io and dive into the shows he is producing. You can also get in touch with Joe on LinkedIn. Find all the links below in the show notes. You can subscribe to The Virtual Frontier on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube, or wherever podcasts can be found. And while you're there, you can leave us a review. Please support us on Patreon so we can keep improving the show and your experience. On behalf of the team here at The Virtual Frontier, I want to thank you for listening. So until next episode, keep exploring new frontiers.